On a cold morning in January 1555, just weeks after the death of her half, Sister Mary I, England watched 25-year-old Elizabeth Tudor ascend to the throne. Crowds filled the streets of London, bells rang from every parish, and foreign ambassadors gathered to study the new sovereign's face, searching for the future of England in her expressions. What they saw was a poised young woman, sharp in intellect and dazzling in political instinct, but behind the carefully controlled smile lay a truth that no one outside her closest circle fully understood. It was a truth buried beneath layers of political caution, childhood trauma, physical suffering, and state secrecy. A truth that would ultimately earn her the title the Virgin Queen and raise questions that historians would debate for centuries. Elizabeth's life had been shaped by danger long before she ever wore the crown. Born on *** 7 September 1005, 133 ***, she entered a world already shaken by her father Henry Roman VIII's dangerous gamble against the Catholic Church. Her mother, ** Anne Boleyn ** had risen swiftly from lady-in-waiting to queen, but her fall was even swifter. When Elizabeth was barely 2 years old, Anne was executed on charges that historians widely regard as fabricated. The little princess was declared illegitimate, removed from the line of succession, and pushed aside as a political inconvenience. This early trauma left a deep mark on her psyche. Even as queen, Elizabeth referred to herself as her mother's daughter only rarely. The dangers surrounding Elizabeth did not ease with age. Under her stepmother Catherine Parr, she finally found stability, but that stability shattered when the ambitious Thomas Seymour grew dangerously close to the adolescent princess. The episodes involving Seymour, which included inappropriate encounters and morning visits that alarmed Catherine Parr herself, forced Elizabeth into a state of hyper-vigilance. She learned to hide her emotions, guard her words, and build a wall between her inner self and the world around her. Historians argue that this experience taught her the risks of intimacy long before she reached adulthood. As Elizabeth matured, she developed a brilliance that both impressed and intimidated those around her. Fluent in Latin, French, Italian, and later even Welsh and Spanish, she became one of the most intellectually capable monarchs Europe had ever seen. But along with her mind came a body that was more fragile than her public image suggested. Throughout her life, Elizabeth suffered repeated bouts of illness that were often kept hidden from the public. One such episode occurred in ** 1005, 162 **, when she nearly died from smallpox. The disease scarred her physically and left her with lifelong health complications, including persistent pain and weakness recorded in the notes of her physicians. These scars, physical and psychological, were slowly weaving themselves into the mystery behind her lifelong avoidance of marriage. By the time she became queen in 158, marriage was not merely a personal choice. It was a matter of national survival. Every major power in Europe sent ambassadors urging her to marry quickly. Spain wanted an alliance. France sought influence. The Holy Roman Empire hoped to pull England back into Catholic unity. Her own councilmen declared that a queen without a husband left the kingdom vulnerable. Despite the immense pressure, Elizabeth consistently resisted. She gave diplomatic, polished explanations, but the deeper reason remained hidden from the world. One of the earliest signs that Elizabeth's refusal had deeper roots emerged in the letters of European ambassadors. The Spanish ambassador, Alvaro de la Quadra ***, wrote repeatedly to King Philip Roman II that Elizabeth avoided physical contact with men and seemed deeply uncomfortable with discussions of consummation. The Venetian ambassador, Giovanni Michiel, observed that she used marriage proposals as political tools but recoiled at the thought of actually becoming a wife. These observations, when combined with her childhood experiences and the dangerous politics surrounding her mother's downfall, painted a complex psychological portrait. but they still did not explain the full reason historians would uncover centuries later. Elizabeth's closest companion, Robert Dudley became the center of endless speculation. Handsome, charismatic, and ambitious, Dudley was the only man with whom Elizabeth seemed emotionally open. The mysterious death of Dudley's wife, Amy Robsart in 1560, ignited one of the most sensational scandals of the Tudor era. Many whispered that Dudley had murdered his wife to clear the way for marriage to the Queen. Though no evidence supported this and modern forensic studies suggest a tragic accident, the scandal nonetheless destroyed any possibility of their marriage. Elizabeth understood that marrying Dudley would undermine her entire reign. Still, Dudley alone did not explain the Virgin Queen narrative. Her refusal continued even after he remarried, even after foreign suitors offered vast alliances, even after her kingdom faced threats that marriage could have helped diffuse. This constancy prompted later historians to consider deeper causes. Some scholars believe a secret medical condition shaped Elizabeth's life. Reports from her physicians describe abdominal pain, irregular health episodes, and symptoms that later doctors speculated could indicate a deformity or congenital condition. Because Tudor courts concealed the monarch's medical details to avoid political exploitation, exact documentation is scarce, but several accounts noted that Elizabeth privately expressed fear of childbirth. In the 16th century, childbirth was dangerous even for the healthiest women. For someone with chronic medical issues, it could be fatal. Elizabeth had watched her cousin Jane Seymour die after giving birth to her half-brother Edward VI. She had seen childbirth deaths across the Tudor court. These experiences, combined with her personal health history, raised suspicions that Elizabeth may have believed childbirth would kill her. But there is another dimension, one hidden for more than 4 centuries, that modern historians have revisited with increasing seriousness. It revolves around the traumatic impact of Seymour's behavior during Elizabeth's adolescence. Modern psychologists argue that early boundary violations can leave lasting consequences, shaping how an adult processes intimacy, trust, and vulnerability. Elizabeth's own letters after the Seymour scandal reveal fear, guilt, and shame far beyond what a typical 14-year-old would express. She later told one of her ladies that she would never put herself in a position where a man could control her fate. Her reluctance to marry, then, was not merely political. It was deeply personal, rooted in early trauma that shaped her emotional landscape for the rest of her life. By the time Elizabeth became queen, marriage had transformed from a danger to a strategic tool. She discovered that by remaining unmarried, she held power over the great courts of Europe. France, Spain, and the Empire all vied for her hand, allowing her to manipulate alliances without binding herself to any of them. This political victory, however, also became a personal prison. She cultivated the public image of the Virgin Queen, a monarch so devoted to England that she needed no husband. But privately, she lived with a grief she rarely admitted. She once told a trusted confidante, "Sorrow makes a woman wiser, but it does not make her happier." Elizabeth's refusal to marry was not the result of a single cause. It was the convergence of trauma, fear, political danger, personal illness, and deeply guarded secrets, and it was only the beginning. As the decades passed and her reign grew more powerful, her decision reverberated through English politics, shaping succession crises, international rivalries, and the identity of the Tudor state itself. Her secret would remain buried, misunderstood, and debated for more than 400 years. When Elizabeth settled into her throne after her 1559 coronation, Europe waited anxiously for her next move. Marriage was not simply expected of her, it was demanded. A queen without a husband was viewed as a threat to political balance, religious stability, and dynastic continuity. But Elizabeth, now a monarch hardened by the dangers of her youth, recognized that marriage was a battlefield far more treacherous than any foreign army, and so she crafted one of the most brilliant political strategies in royal history. For the next 4 decades, she used the idea of marriage as a weapon, a shield, and a diplomatic game board, all while carefully guarding the personal secrets that would prevent her from ever accepting a husband. Her first major test came from Spain. King Philip Roman II, widower of Queen Mary I, made an early attempt to propose to Elizabeth. This was not a gesture of affection, but a calculated political act. Spain was Catholic, wealthy, and militarily powerful. A marriage between Elizabeth and Philip would pull England back toward Catholicism and strengthen the Catholic alliance that dominated Europe. But for Elizabeth, Philip was everything she needed to avoid. The English people despised Spanish interference after Mary's reign. Marrying Philip would make her a puppet in Catholic politics and likely destabilize her fragile rule. Elizabeth's rejection of Philip stunned Europe. She wrapped her refusal in layers of polite diplomacy, complimenting the Spanish king while making it clear she would not be controlled. It was the first bold signal that she would place England above all personal matters. But privately, it was also a sign that Elizabeth would not risk a marriage that could expose her vulnerabilities, physical or emotional. Foreign ambassadors watched her closely. The French sent envoys to negotiate a potential marriage to the Duke of Anjou, a proposal Elizabeth entertained for years. She called Anjou her frog, teased him with flirtation, and used the negotiations to ease tensions between England and France. But despite outward enthusiasm, she never intended to marry him. Documents from her council meetings show that the English nobility strongly opposed the match, fearing that France would dominate England just as Spain had dominated Mary's reign. The English people also reacted with fury. Protestant England had no desire to see their queen bound to a Catholic prince. Still, Elizabeth kept the talks alive for nearly a decade. She used the possibility of marriage with Anjou to balance Spanish aggression, win French diplomatic support, and maintain peace during vulnerable years of her rule. It was a carefully calibrated political performance. But beneath the political brilliance, her private condition, the one whispered about by her physicians and hinted at in foreign correspondence, made the idea of marriage personally terrifying. Her body remained frail after her battle with smallpox. Letters written by her closest ladies describe periods where she could hardly stand or suffered intense abdominal pain. These symptoms fueled speculation that her health issues were a deeply personal reason she avoided marriage. Inside the English court, pressure intensified. Her chief advisor, William Cecil ***, argued that marriage was essential for the continuation of the Tudor dynasty. Without an heir, England risked civil war. The wounds of the Wars of the Roses, where rival families fought brutally for the throne, still haunted the political memory of the realm. Elizabeth understood this danger well, but she also understood the danger of childbirth. In the mid-16th century, childbirth was one of the leading causes of death for women. Her own stepmother, Jane Seymour, had died giving birth to her brother Edward. Many noblewomen of the Tudor court had suffered similar fates. For a queen with chronic medical issues, childbirth represented a potentially fatal risk. It was during this period that Robert Dudley, Elizabeth's closest companion, gained unprecedented influence. Their relationship became the center of constant gossip. Foreign ambassadors wrote detailed letters describing their closeness, noting moments where Elizabeth leaned emotionally on Dudley more than anyone else. Yet even with her deepest affection for him, she refused to marry him. The scandal surrounding Amy Robsart's death made a marriage to Dudley politically impossible, but even more importantly, Dudley represented something Elizabeth could not accept. Marriage to him would have forced her into vulnerability. She once told a lady of her chamber that a queen married is a queen destroyed. That sentence captured her deepest belief. Marriage meant surrendering control, and Elizabeth could not surrender control of her fate, her body, or her kingdom. As Europe observed Elizabeth's refusal to marry, rumors began to circulate. Some claimed she was incapable of bearing children. Others whispered that she was physically deformed or infertile due to a childhood illness. Still, others insisted she had sworn a vow of chastity for religious reasons. The French ambassador in 1570 wrote that Elizabeth feared marriage because she feared the pain of childbirth. But none of these explanations fully captured the truth. It was not one reason, but a lifetime of intersecting fears, traumas, and political calculations that guided her decisions. Her enemies took full advantage of her unmarried state. Catholic exiles published pamphlets accusing Elizabeth of immoral behavior, claiming her refusal to marry was evidence of hidden sin. These attacks were designed to weaken her moral authority and provoke rebellion. But Elizabeth countered these narratives by crafting a powerful public image. She portrayed herself as a divinely chosen monarch whose purity symbolized England's purity. The iconography of the Virgin Queen began to take shape during the 1570. Artists painted her with symbols of chastity, purity, and divine light. Poets compared her to Astrea, the virgin goddess of justice. Through symbolism, she transformed her private choice into a national mythology. Still, behind the grandeur, the political consequences of her decision became increasingly severe. As the decades passed, English succession crises grew more dangerous. Rival claimants to the throne emerged. Catholic powers supported Mary, Queen of Scots, as an alternative monarch. The threat of civil war lurked beneath every diplomatic decision. Elizabeth had no heir, and her refusal to marry meant the Tudor dynasty would end with her. Yet she persisted, choosing political autonomy and personal safety above dynastic continuity. In her council meetings, pressure to marry reached its peak in the early 1570s. Advisors pleaded with her to choose a husband before it was too late. Elizabeth responded not with anger, but with a calm, almost chilling clarity. She told them that she was married to England, and England needed no other husband. Her words were both poetic and strategic. By framing her celibacy as devotion to her kingdom, she transformed a personal necessity into a national virtue. Her decision not only shaped English politics, but also altered the trajectory of European history. It prevented England from falling under foreign control. It kept the nation independent at a time when Catholic empires threatened to absorb weaker states. It forced the English state to develop new structures of governance, diplomacy, and identity. And it preserved Elizabeth's personal power until her dying day. But the cost was enormous. The succession crisis would haunt England for the rest of her reign. Her enemies would take advantage of her weakness. And her personal life would be one of loneliness, emotional restraint, and unspoken sorrow. Her vow of virginity was not a choice made lightly. It was the result of fear, trauma, illness, political necessity, and a lifetime of guarding a secret the world would not fully understand for centuries. As Elizabeth's reign entered its third decade, the world saw a monarch at the peak of her power. The defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 cemented her image as a warrior queen. English culture flourished, the economy strengthened, and the kingdom stood more unified than it had been in generations. Yet behind the ceremonial displays, diplomatic triumphs, and carefully painted portraits, Elizabeth carried a burden of private suffering that the court rarely witnessed, and that historians would spend centuries trying to understand. Her refusal to marry was not merely political strategy. It was also deeply rooted in personal experiences and chronic physical conditions that she concealed under layers of wit, charm, and royal command. Those who observed her closely reported moments of exhaustion, sudden weakness, and episodes of emotional withdrawal. Unlike the confident figure she projected during public ceremonies, Elizabeth in private revealed the scars of her past and the fears she hid from the world. One of the most significant private struggles she endured was the long echo of her childhood trauma. The Seymour scandal of her teenage years left wounds that shaped her lifelong relationship with intimacy. Modern scholars, reviewing her letters and the testimonies recorded by Catherine Parr's household, argue that Elizabeth learned early that vulnerability could be exploited. Thomas Seymour's inappropriate behavior toward the 15-year-old Elizabeth forced her into years of silence and self-control. The idea of being physically close to a man carried associations of danger, shame, and public scandal. Even as queen, she remained on constant guard against any situation that could jeopardize her reputation or autonomy. Her ladies-in-waiting, who observed her more closely than anyone else, left behind subtle hints. They described a queen who often dismissed discussions of marriage with visible discomfort, whose face tightened when advisers mentioned consummation, and who reacted with cold determination the moment a suitor expected anything beyond diplomacy. The secrecy around her personal life was so complete that even her most trusted attendants rarely knew how deeply these memories haunted her decisions. Yet trauma alone did not fully define Elizabeth's fears. Her physical health played a major role. After surviving smallpox in 1562, her body never fully recovered. Physicians recorded lasting complications, including episodes of intense fever, swelling, and fatigue. Some modern analysts suggest she may have suffered permanent internal damage, which would have made pregnancy far more dangerous for her than for other women of her time. Childbirth was already a leading cause of death in 16th century England. For a woman with chronic health issues, it could easily become fatal. Elizabeth's smallpox scars were carefully concealed with heavy layers of Venetian ceruse, a white makeup that covered imperfections but was highly toxic. Over years, it caused hair loss, skin deterioration, and further health complications. By the 1570s, some courtiers quietly remarked that she applied layers of cosmetics so thick that she appeared to wear a mask. These physical insecurities further reduced her interest in marriage. The idea of exposing her vulnerabilities to a husband was unacceptable to a woman who had spent her entire life maintaining a flawless public facade. Her fear of childbirth was also fed by the tragedies she had seen in her own family. Jane Seymour, her stepmother, died shortly after giving birth to Edward VI. Her cousin, Lady Jane Grey, married at 17 and was executed less than a year later due to political intrigue triggered by issues of succession. Mary I endured phantom pregnancies that shattered her health and reputation. Every example of marriage around Elizabeth was laced with danger, humiliation, or death. These were not abstract fears, but lived experiences that shaped her perception of womanhood and monarchy. Even her relationship with Robert Dudley, the man closest to her heart, reflected these deeper fears. Their bond was undeniable. Dudley understood her moods, her humor, and her political instincts better than any other man at court. But he also represented a life she believed she could never have. When Dudley's wife Amy Robsart died, Elizabeth faced a moment of personal crisis. Many expected her to marry him, but instead of embracing the opportunity, she pulled away. The scandal around Amy's mysterious fall destroyed Elizabeth's trust in the court's willingness to accept her choices. She recognized that any marriage to Dudley would provoke rebellion, cast doubt on her legitimacy, and weaken her rule. Psychologically, the scandal also reawakened the fears sparked by her mother's fate. Anne Boleyn had been executed partly due to accusations of adultery and political manipulation. Elizabeth understood that a queen who married risked becoming vulnerable to the same accusations. By remaining unmarried, she protected herself from the kind of political traps that had destroyed both her mother and her cousin Catherine Howard. A queen without a husband was a queen no man could accuse, control, or overthrow. Elizabeth's reign was full of suitors who tested these boundaries. The Duke of Anjou charmed her court with wit and diplomacy. For a brief period, she seemed genuinely fond of him. Yet when the prospect of marriage became real, Elizabeth's anxiety surfaced. Contemporary accounts describe her withdrawing emotionally, hesitating, delaying, and finally pulling back just as negotiations reached their peak. The thought of binding herself to a man, especially a foreign Catholic prince, triggered a blend of political alarm and personal panic. Behind closed doors, her ladies recorded episodes where Elizabeth would pace her chambers, expressing fears of pregnancy, fears of betrayal, and fears of losing her identity. She once admitted that she feared dying in childbed, as so many noble women had. She also confessed a deeper fear, the fear that marriage would diminish her authority and reduce her to the role of a traditional wife. Unlike kings, a queen regnante who married risked losing control. Her husband would be expected to lead. Her authority would be questioned, and if she dared to act independently, she would face accusations of being unnatural or unfit. This anxiety manifested in ways that even foreign ambassadors noticed. They wrote about her emotional shifts during courtship discussions, noting that she often appeared enthusiastic at first, but grew visibly anxious when commitment approached. While some ambassadors interpreted this as manipulation, others observed a genuine fear beneath the performance. The Venetian ambassador Antonio Foscarini wrote that Elizabeth seemed frightened by the idea of surrendering her freedom, more so than any monarch he had ever studied. By the late 1580s, Elizabeth's private suffering became more pronounced. She endured periods of insomnia, depression, and intense melancholy. The stress of ruling a nation under constant threat, combined with the burden of her secret fears, took a toll on her health. She often spent long hours alone, writing letters, reading classical texts, and praying. Her companions described these private moments with sympathy. They saw a queen who outwardly commanded empires, but inwardly wrestled with loneliness and vulnerability. Her fear of intimacy was so deeply rooted that even rumors of her having lovers, spread by her enemies, had no basis in reality. Every man who came close to the Queen was carefully watched. Elizabeth allowed flirtation as part of her political performance, but she never allowed any man to breach the walls she had built around herself. Those walls were constructed from trauma, reinforced by political necessity, and defended by the lifelong consequences of being Henry Roman VIII's daughter. By remaining unmarried, Elizabeth stayed safe from the dangers of childbirth, the betrayals of court politics, and the emotional vulnerabilities that had scarred her youth. But this decision also condemned her to a life of solitude. As she aged, the once vibrant and playful queen became more severe, more wary, and more guarded. The weight of her secret reasons for rejecting marriage pressed heavily upon her as time slowed, and the Tudor dynasty approached its end. Her refusal to marry was not merely a political stance. It was a complex response to a lifetime of pain, fear, illness, and insecurity that she never publicly revealed. This hidden truth would shape her final years and determine the fate of England after her death. By the time Elizabeth reached her 60th year, the court no longer whispered about the question that had haunted England for decades. It shouted it openly. She had no husband, no children, and no declared heir. For the nobles who depended on stable succession, for the foreign powers watching from across the Channel, and for Elizabeth herself, the reality grew more pressing. Yet still she refused marriage, and still she kept the deepest reasons hidden behind her carefully crafted mask of royal authority. Only in her final years did the full weight of her lifelong decision reveal itself, influencing political events that would stretch far beyond her lifetime. The pressures of age did not ease the burden. As the Queen approached her 70s, her health deteriorated at a noticeable pace. Her once luminous complexion, maintained for decades through layers of Venetian ceruse, grew increasingly brittle. Her hair thinned, forcing her to rely heavily on wigs. Her energy declined, her sleep patterns broke down, and she experienced periods of profound melancholy that contemporaries described as silent despair. The physical wear on her body only deepened the secret fears she had lived with since youth. The idea of marriage, even in old age, remained unthinkable for her. Her refusal, however, sparked an increasingly dangerous succession crisis. Foreign powers used it to their advantage. Spain continued supporting Catholic factions who wished to replace Elizabeth with Mary, Queen of Scots, a Catholic rival with strong hereditary claims. The presence of Mary alone cast a shadow across England, igniting rebellions like the Northern Rising of 1569. Elizabeth's decision not to marry deprived England of a Tudor prince or princess who could have solidified the Protestant line. This instability shaped her final decades and forced her into difficult decisions, including the eventual execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, in 1587. That event, one of the most dramatic in her reign, was deeply tied to Elizabeth's marital choices. Had she produced an heir, Mary's cause would have lost its momentum, and Europe's power balance might have shifted in an entirely different direction. The final years of Elizabeth's life offered glimpses of the emotional cost she had carried in silence. Close attendants recorded moments where she confessed regrets, though never directly addressing marriage. Instead, she spoke in riddles, referring to her body as her kingdom's burden and lamenting that a monarch's heart is always alone. These comments reflected the conflict she had lived with since adolescence, the tension between personal suffering and public duty. Her most trusted adviser in these final years was Robert Cecil, the son of her longtime counselor William Cecil. By this time, Elizabeth's body was weakened by years of illness, exposure to toxic cosmetics, and the stress of unrelenting political warfare. She spent long hours motionless, lost in deep thought. Her ladies avoided pressing her too hard, knowing that even gentle reminders of her mortality could cause her distress. Yet Cecil knew that the kingdom needed a clear successor. Without one, civil war loomed. But the same fears that haunted Elizabeth throughout her life prevented her from openly naming an heir. She believed correctly that proclaiming a successor while she lived would weaken her authority and invite foreign plots or internal conspiracies. Her decision was not born from stubbornness alone. It was rooted in decades of trauma, insecurity, and anxiety over exposing any vulnerability. A queen who could not risk marriage was equally unwilling to risk giving any living person the power to anticipate her death. Elizabeth's final months were shaped by these unresolved burdens. In the winter of 1602, she fell into a profound depression. Letters from the period describe her sitting motionless for hours, refusing food and rejecting her bed in favor of cushions on the floor. Her melancholy was so severe that her ladies feared she might simply fade away from grief. The stress of a lifetime of solitude, political warfare, personal trauma, and hidden suffering had caught up to her. On the last night of her life, she whispered that she saw many ghosts standing around her. Whether these were hallucinations or poetic metaphors recorded by her attendants, they symbolized the weight of a life spent balancing trauma and duty. When asked directly about the succession, she responded with a faint gesture interpreted as approval for James VI of Scotland to take the throne. Her reluctance to speak aloud, even at this moment, demonstrated how deeply she feared that revealing her vulnerabilities could undermine England's stability. Elizabeth died on *** 24 March 1006, 103 ***, leaving behind a kingdom transformed by her decisions. Her refusal to marry had ended the Tudor bloodline but ushered in the Stuart dynasty. It prevented foreign domination of England, helped strengthen Protestant identity, and ensured that English politics would grow increasingly independent of Europe. It also shaped the geopolitical future in ways that would ripple across centuries. The England that emerged after her reign became a naval power, a colonial empire, and a cultural force that shaped the modern world. Historians widely agree that these developments might have unfolded differently under a queen whose marriage tied her politically to Spain, France, or the Holy Roman Empire, but the most haunting revelation came centuries after her death. Historians in the 19th and 20th centuries began re-examining letters, medical notes, ambassador reports, and eyewitness accounts. These records suggested that Elizabeth's lifelong refusal to marry was not based solely on political strategy or desire for independence. It was deeply connected to her private suffering, her childhood trauma, her near-fatal illness, her fear of childbirth, her internal physical conditions, and her psychological scars formed a secret that she carried with her until her final breath. She understood the symbolic power of presenting herself as the Virgin Queen, but she also understood that revealing her private struggle would undermine her authority in a male-dominated world. Modern psychologists and medical historians now believe that Elizabeth likely lived with conditions that made sexual relations or childbirth physically impossible or extremely dangerous. Combined with the trauma of Thomas Seymour's behavior during her adolescence and the political instability created by her mother's execution, Elizabeth built her life around protecting herself from situations that could threaten her physically or emotionally. This truth, hidden for 4 centuries, challenged the earlier myth that she simply preferred independence or was exceptionally devoted to chastity. Instead, it revealed a deeply human and vulnerable monarch who learned to transform her greatest fear into her greatest political strength. Her image as the Virgin Queen became a masterpiece of self-creation. It shielded her personal suffering, protected her from political exploitation, and allowed her to rule a dangerous age with unmatched control. Yet it also trapped her in a persona that left little room for companionship, comfort, or love. Her loneliness in old age stands as a quiet reminder of the cost behind her triumphs. Elizabeth's life teaches a powerful lesson about leadership and trauma. Her courage did not come from invulnerability, but from the strength to hide her vulnerabilities in a world that punished weakness. She shaped English history not despite her pain, but because she learned to channel it into authority. Her story remains one of the most complex portraits of a monarch in world history, a woman who balanced strength and sorrow with a precision that shaped an empire. The sickening reason behind Elizabeth's lifelong refusal to marry was not a single secret, but a lifetime of wounds, fears, and insecurities that she carried silently. And it remained concealed for 400 years because the Queen herself ensured that the truth would be buried beneath the myth she crafted.